I'm Lee Goldberg. It's May 6, 2011, and I'm interviewing Lowell Ganz for the Academy. I did it again. Hi, I'm Lee Goldberg. It's May 6, 2011. I'm interviewing Lowell Ganz for the Archive of American Television in Beverly Hills, California. A few questions about your background. When were you born, and what was your name at birth?
My name at birth is, oddly enough, the same name I'm using now, Lowell Ganz. I was born in the Bronx in 1948, grew up in Queens, and came out to California in 1972.
What was your father's name, and what did he do for a living?
My dad's name was Irving, and he did a few things. He was when I was born, he worked in an actual sweatshop, like in an old movie. Then he and his brother-in-law opened a store downtown Manhattan where they sold stationery supplies and greeting cards, and then they got rid of that. And my dad was an admirable guy. He at a fairly advanced age, he became like a general manager and vice president of an art supply company. This was like well into his 40s. And he did that until his retirement.
Didn't he spend some time as a limousine driver or something as well?
No, the limousine driver story.
Well, we won't need to tell the story now, but I thought I had skipped over some. What was your mother's name, and what did she do?
My mother is still, happy to say, Jean Ganz. She was classic post-war baby boom homemaker, housewife. Mm-hmm. Always there at home, cooking meals, and just like on TV.
Did you have any brothers and sisters? Or do you
I have a younger brother, Jeffrey, who has been in and out of the entertainment business over the years. He's directed TV episodes and even produced a couple of TV series in his time. He's WGA and DGA and Producers Guild, and he's had something of a career as well.
What were your interests growing up?
My interests growing up were largely baseball. That's all. That was that, and TV. Baseball and television. Baseball on television was perfect. But that was it. I loved watching baseball and playing baseball and watching TV, sitcoms. I didn't know that I was training my mind to be in sitcoms. It was only till I got out here and started working in it that I realized I had actually been studying my whole life for that work. I just didn't realize I was.
Why do you suppose TV was so big in your household that you and your brother ended up going into the business?
My dad loved TV. My dad absolutely loved it, and he loved comedy. And looking back on it, he had great taste in comedy. He liked really all the best stuff. He liked Jackie Gleason and Jack Benny and Phil Silvers and Jack Parr and Steve Allen. He had wonderful taste, like I don't mean to insult anybody, but like when the sort of the goofier sitcoms came on about, hillbillies or witches or flying pirates or whatever was going on, he had no interest in that whatsoever. That just went right by him. But there was always good comedy on in the house.
Were those also your favorite shows, or were your tastes a little bit different than your dad?
Well, I mean, when I was a little kid, I liked some silly stuff also, mm-hmm. But we had one TV. We were one TV family because you actually did that in those days. So I watched what he watched. I sat right next to him. He had a big chair and I had a little chair. And so I watched Groucho and Jack Benny and the Honeymooners and all that stuff. And then later the Dick Van Dyke Show, which I was crazy about. I mean, just knocked me over. I just couldn't believe how much I loved that show. And we watched all that stuff together.
Were there other shows besides Dick Van Dyke that really blew you away at the time?
At the time, nothing as much as that. Thinking back on it, because Babalu and I discussed this. Babalu is my partner for the last 30 years. We talk about it. We didn't know each other as kids, but turns out we had exactly the same childhood separately. We talk about the things we liked, and we often talk about how the Van Dyke Show was just this odd island of genius in 60s television sitcom when nobody else even seemed to be trying to do. It wasn't even like other shows were trying and falling short. They seemed to have a completely different idea of what they wanted to do on TV. So the Van Dyke Show was like one of those things where you just said, I think they made this show just for me.
So was that show influential in making you want to become a TV writer? Was that what you always wanted to do, or did you have other career aspirations?
I'm sure on some level it did make me want to be a TV writer, because the interesting thing about the Van Dyke Show is that he was a TV writer. So you couldn't really decide, did you want to write for the Dick Van Dyke Show, or did you want to write for the Alan Brady Show and work with Rob Petrie and Sally and Buddy, and of course be married to Laura? That would have been that was impossible on so many levels. But it was sort of this odd circle within a circle. What about it was actually luring you in? But I was still a little young, and I don't think while the Van Dyke Show was actually on in its first run, I was thinking in terms of, boy, wouldn't it be great if I could do that or write that? But then, of course, in New York, they reran it 6 nights a week throughout the late 60s and into the 70s. And at that point, I think it was having that kind of specific direct impact on me where I wanted to do that.
But early on, did you have other career aspirations? Did you want to follow your father into whatever business he was in? Or
no, I have to admit, I was probably not what you would consider an aspirational kid. I was in sort of a perpetual state of drift. I did just enough schoolwork so that they wouldn't call my parents in, and I went to college at Queens College, which was free, and I got my money's worth.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to Martin Van Buren High School in Queens Village, which was great because Queens was growing so much at that time. They built it like for, they said they'd only have to accommodate like 1,500 students, but they knew it was growing, so they built it for 3,000 students. And by the time it opened, they had 6,000 students there. So you kind of got lost in the. It was not an American graffiti type experience. It was very different. And then in college, I just didn't. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was not really applying myself to anything. Sometimes when I speak to young students now at college, they tell me that their parents don't want them to go into show business. I tell them, well, the mistake you've made is you've not systematically lowered their expectations for you so that they'd be thrilled if you said you wanted to do anything. I said, that's what I did.
So you weren't experimenting with writing in high school before you went to college?
I was not experimenting with writing in high school at all. It was not. I was not focused really in any direction, let alone writing.
Did it begin in college? Is that where you started discovering yourself as a writer?
It began in college, absolutely, and not through any kind of applied way. There was this show at Queens College that they put on every year called Queens College Frolics. I didn't name it. Okay, they put on this huge auditorium, sat like 2,200 people, and you and any group that you belong to, like what they call a house plan or fraternity or something, could audition to get into the show with like a 10 or 15 minute skit, often with music, and they would take like 8 a year. And a bunch of the guys that I was friends with said we should do that because everybody I knew was funny. I mean, I only had funny friends. And so he said, yeah, we could probably do it. And then it just one of those odd things. It turned out that even though all my friends were funny, I don't know why. I think just from watching so much sitcom and loving it so much, I seemed to be the one who actually like put one sentence after another. Like, so, well, no, if he says that, somebody else has to say something that indicates that they heard what the first person said. I mean, it sounds very basic and primitive, but surprisingly, not everybody kind of instinctively does that. So we did that, and we won a trophy, which I still have in my basement from 1970. And then this kid that I used to know when we were children, who I lost touch with, saw the show and came to me, this fellow Mark Rothman, who became my first writing partner, and said, "You wrote that, right?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's a career. People do that." He said, "I've been thinking about," he wanted to be an actor,
Right.
but he said, acting could be tough. He said, people write ha-ha for a living, is how he put it. And I said, "Yeah, okay." And as I'd say, that was the first time that I knew what kind of work I was out of.
Did you have any clue how to embark on that? I mean, did you
No.
pursue other jobs first?
No. I worked. I always worked as a kid. I worked in a supermarket. I worked in a department store. I had all kinds of awful jobs. I mean, I always had a job while I was going to school. But our greatest asset, I think, was complete ignorance. The fact that we had no idea how absurdly stupid the odds were, the chances were to be sitting in an apartment in Queens and say, we'll write something that occurs to us, then we'll put it in an envelope and mail it out to California or someplace, like to the Flip Wilson show or the That was another thing. We thought we would be variety show writers. We were actually trying to jump onto a sinking ship because Variety was rapidly disappearing even then, and we didn't even understand that. That didn't get through to us.
Tell me a little about the early days of your partnership. What made you think you two could write together?
I don't know. Again, I just, there was nothing that made us think we couldn't. We got along. Mm-hmm. We liked kind of the same stuff. We went to ball games together. That's a big thing.
You mentioned the difference between you and the other people who did the Follies or the Frolics show. Yeah. That they were coming up with jokes, but you mentioned there had to be a continuity. One line led to another. So you had a clear sense of where you fit into that relationship. What were some of the differences between you and Mark at that early stage that you brought to the partnership?
Well, the way Mark tells it after, he said he liked the idea of my just sort of going off, that I would just sort of talk real fast, say a lot of things, and that he kind of was really good at sort of shaping it, kind of like that. Wait a minute. But I think he's selling himself a little short there. Mm-hmm. He's a funny guy, and I don't think he says we sort of fell into roles. I didn't really see it that way. I thought we just.
So if you fell into roles, you were the brainstorming guy and he was the structure guy, or
he seems to kind of imply that that's what it was. I think he's oversimplifying it a little bit to my benefit, frankly. I thought he was just as funny and just as creative, and we liked hanging out together. I mean that's kind of a big thing too. Even when we weren't writing, we'd go. Like I say, we go to the ball game, we go to the movies, we enjoyed the time spent together. He liked my parents very much, so he liked hanging out at my parents' apartment, so that was helpful. We both, again, loved the Dick Van Dyke Show. It was like we, swap episodes and lines from it with each other.
Well, was there any point, here you were, you decided you wanted to be TV writers, you were aiming towards variety shows. Was there a point when you looked at the Dick Van Dyke Show and said, that could be us? We could be...
Incredibly, I don't know why we weren't focused towards sitcom. Actually, I sort of do. For me, I mean, and this will sound almost sad, I thought that anybody who wrote a sitcom, even a bad one, was like a genius. I thought, how do you, I mean, it's 24 minutes long. I mean, and it's got to end. It's got to wrap up the story. You have to have like these secondary characters who have to be consistent and do. I just seemed. So I had no training at all. I never took writing course. I mean, I say as a joke, but it's true. Not only had I never written anything, I had never met anyone who had ever written anything. That's how outside the world of writing I was. So I don't think we ever saw. So at least I never saw myself as writing sitcoms.
As a basis for writing your sketches or ultimately your spec script, where were you doing your research? Where were you getting your hands on actual scripts or the format for what you were doing?
We weren't.
You're just making it up as you went along.
Yeah, we'd watch the Carol Burnett show and go, well, here's an idea for a sketch they might do. And then we'd write it in some format Mark's mother would type it up. And like I say, we'd put it in an envelope and mail it to California. I think we actually wrote on the envelope, California. I don't know if it was pointed towards anything.
How did you end up segueing from the desire to do variety shows to actually writing a spec Odd Couple?
Just because the chance was there. That was it.
And what was the chance?
Pure hunger. The chance was Mark's dad was a limo driver. He actually owned his own little limo company, but he was his own driver. It was just he was the boss and the driver. And there's we go way back in time now. There was a show done, an afternoon talk show done in Philadelphia in those days called the Mike Douglas Show. And that's how Mark's dad made his living. People who would appear on the Mike Douglas Show, would come east, usually from California, but they would stay in New York if they were doing, publicity for something. And they would just go down to Philadelphia to do the Mike Douglas Show for the afternoon. Mark's dad had that account. Mark's dad had that account. He drove celebrities from there, picked them up at their hotel in Manhattan and would drive them down to Philadelphia. So he got to know everybody on the Douglas Show because he would hang around through the whole show. And he would be given a list every week of who he was gonna drive. And he said to us, "I'm driving Tony Randall and Jack Klugman to do the Douglas Show in whatever he told us, 3 days, 4 days." So we wrote an Odd Couple script. I mean, just because that seemed too obvious to not. And Abe Rothman, he had no longer with us. He had he had guts. He just because when you think about it afterwards, somebody could call and say, your limo driver bothered me with his son's script. That's not cool, and he could lose his account, and then he's starving. But a good dad, he gave them the script, and you go, well, what's that going to accomplish? But then I don't know how much time passed by, not very much, and we got a call from California saying that Gary Marshall had read the script and thought it had some potential, and they were looking for new.
Had Tony Randall read it before he passed it along?
Yes, Tony and Jack both. It turned out Tony and Jack had both read the script, and then life is just so packed with luck. It's just, we all want to think that we have control over the. They were in an irritable mood. It turns out we knew nothing of this about the writing at the time. Why weren't there newer, fresher writers or something? And it hit them just the day they wanted to like something. So they gave it to Gary, and unbeknownst to us, Gary was the king of looking for young writers. That was his. It was a passion with him to find young writers. And so he read it, and we get this phone call that Gary Marshall had read our script, thought it had some potential. If we would get on a plane and fly out there and drive over to Paramount, he'd meet us and and give us a chance.
Was the script even written in sitcom format?
I don't know. I know it was unusable as far as content was concerned because. We wrote an enormous part for a guest, for a day player who took the stage all by himself. Mm-hmm. It was about a burglar broke into their apartment, and what they liked, the funny part was that the burglar broke in, used the place for a while to make phone calls, this, that, left the place a mess. Tony came home, saw it. Jack actually couldn't remember whether he had made this mess or not. It was so. Making a mess was so natural to them, and they kind of liked that little twist. They thought that showed something, but the episode was not usable or producible or anything like that. They just said, "Hang around for a while." They didn't even call us writers. I think we were assistants or something, and they paid us a tiny wage, and we were allowed to kind of observe what was going on.
Well, let's back up a bit. You get the call saying, if you happen to be coming out to California and you happen to want to drive over to Paramount, I'd love to meet you. Did you take that as we've got a job? Let's
yeah, no,
get our asses.
They basically said they'd give us a little fee to we'd be assistants and but they were asking, do you intend to come out for this, or is this not something you want to do? We were there while they were still on the phone. It was that kind of thing.
So it was enough of an incentive to pick up and come to L.A. and abandon.
It's like a cartoon where the papers are from the speed that you. We had nothing to keep us in New York. It's like years later, I got a letter from a kid who went to Queens College who was like the top performer in all the shows and the pitcher on the baseball team and the top student and he had a beautiful girlfriend and everything, and he said to me, Lowell, of all people, to be successful there, I never thought you had so much guts to go out there like that, because that's what you're asking.
Right.
I said to him, Howard, guts had nothing to do with it. We were leaving nothing. If you had things going on in your life that would have made it a decision. So no, it was not even an instant's thought.
So you get out here, you go to the Paramount lot. What happens? He says, "Welcome to LA, guys. Here's your staff job."
We didn't meet Gary because Gary had pneumonia. I remember we met a very nice fellow who since departed named Jerry Davis, who had produced many sitcoms in his life and was a wonderful guy, just a real gentleman. And he told us, that it was a great place to work and it was a top show, and that Jack and Tony were very tough, but that we were going to get to work with Gary and Jerry Belson and Harvey Miller and immodestly he did not include himself, but modestly he did not include himself, but he talked about the great opportunity we were going to have to learn, and we met Harvey Miller, who was going to be our the head writer that season. This was between the second and third season of The Odd Couple. They'd already been on 2 years. And Harvey said to us, "Where are you living?" We said, "Nowhere." And I said, "Who do you know in town?" And we said, "No one." And he said, "Come on, I'm taking you home." And he took us to his house, and he ordered us dinner, and he rented us an apartment, and he rented us a car, like all just on the phone while we were sitting there. And he was just great. And like the next Monday, they gave us this little closet to sit in. And we would go to all the table readings and all the run-throughs and rehearsals and get some kind of sense of how they did this, because we had none at all.
So what did that feel like to actually be living the Dick Van Dyke Show?
It was a fantasy. It was astonishing. It was just because we were sitcom geeks. I mean, we knew who Gary Marshall and Jerry Belson were. We could corner them and tell them which episodes of the Dick Van Dyke. We knew Hey Landlord, which was their 1 season long follow-up series with Sandy Barron and Will Hutchins and Sally Field. We met Jerry Paris, who was directing The Odd Couple, who had been the director of the Van Dyke Show. I mean, it was insane, Jack Klugman and Tony Randall. I mean, I knew every line that Tony Randall spoke in all of the Doris Day Rock Hudson movies. I could feed him back his entire career. I could tell Jack everything he said in Goodbye Columbus.
And did you do that?
I did, yeah. And I realized in retrospect that it was probably a little bit too gee whiz, But I also remember I was also really, really frightened and recognized really early that they had made a mistake in hiring us. That the script that we wrote represented a higher level of knowledge than we actually possessed.
What do you mean by that?
We were kind of funny on the page, but we really had no idea even how to work. It's not just that we weren't ready to write an Emmy-nominated primetime network sitcom, which is what The Odd Couple was, for two of the finest actors in sitcom history. We didn't really even understand how you work, how you just how you come in every day and see what needs to be done and apply yourself, and we didn't belong there, to be perfectly honest. We didn't belong there, and Mark always had more confidence than I did. I mean, he always felt we're great and we're destined for great things. God bless him, he had enough confidence for both of us. I was really scared. I got really scared. And also, Odd Couple was kind of famous for being an open hostility show.
What does that mean?
Well, people didn't pretend. There was no passive-aggressive. It was all aggressive. Uh-huh. No one was passive. Everyone was aggressive. You were told things like, you'd pitch something that wasn't very good, and somebody would say to you, okay, you should stop talking now. Nice things like that. But, they were on such a high level. Jack and Tony were so good, and Gary and Jerry and Harvey were fantastic at what they did.
Well, how long did it take you to feel like you actually belonged there, or that you could belong there? Was it weeks? Was it days?
Well, we were fired after 6 weeks.
That quickly?
Yeah.
Had you written a word before you were fired?
About a word. We wrote a couple of pages. We froze up, and also, here's the joke I always tell: we were fired. It was a combination of office politics and the fact that we were no good. But there was, again, luck. There was that same irritability that Jack and Tony had about where they felt the show was, which had worked in our favor, worked against us, because they got into some terrible fights with people above us, with Jerry Davis and with Harvey. There was some bad moments that I got to witness. People screaming at each other and throwing scripts down and that kind of thing. And there were major changes, like 6 weeks into the season. And amid all that, we were let go. Like we went out with the bathwater, as it were.
Did seeing that hostility, all the anger and everything, did that disillusion you? Did that kill the fantasy you had from?
No, I had no fantasy. I just said, boy, this is a business. You're supposed to. You got to pull your weight. I mean, these guys are great, and I'm not great, and they have no use for me.
So did you figure, okay, we've been fired, we've been revealed as the frauds that we are?
Yes,
did you
very
get in your
much.
car and say, let's head back to New York, or what kept you here?
Well, that seemed like a terrible idea, to go back to New York. I mean, we just said, we're here. We had met a few people. There was a lot going on at Paramount at the time. They were making Love American Style and like a couple of other things. I know this sounds ancient, these references I'm making, but we just said, clearly we shouldn't go back to New York. We're out here now. We met a few people. We should see it through.
But you didn't think being fired from Odd Couple would be a millstone, that it would prevent you from
Well, I don't think
anywhere?
anybody even knew we were ever there. I mean, it's no. It was the industry wasn't aware of us. There was no, it didn't make the trades. That we had been there and weren't anymore. No, we had this little rented apartment up on Sunset, furnished apartment on Sunset, and we just said we should, try to make connections and meet people. And now that we know at least where the studios are, and
I heard you were living in a car, though. That you just mentioned the furnished apartment, but somewhere I read an anecdote that you and your partner for a while had to live in your car.
No, that's hyperbole. I think Babalu, my current partner, my movie partner, I think he did live in his car for a little while, and the stories all get sort of merged. But I was about $8 from living in my car. I mean, when we finally got our second break, I was kind of that close.
Did you have an agent?
Pretty bad. We had an agent who did not and need not have had much interest in us at that point. It was just kind of I don't think he had much hope for us, nor should he have, as I said. But the main thing we did, I remember, is Gary called us in. Gary wasn't the one who fired us directly, but Jerry got that job, Jerry Davis, and said, before you leave, Gary will want to talk to you, and we went in to see Gary, who I already kind of idolized because I saw how he ran the table, and I went, holy crap, how do you get that good? And he, he said, sorry, there's a lot of stuff going on here. And Mark always stood up for himself. Mark always had the guts that I didn't have. And he'd said, this isn't fair because we were really put under Harvey's charge, and he kept telling us we were doing okay. So what were we supposed to think? And then Gary said, well, we fired Harvey. which kept Mark quiet too at that point. But Gary said to us, look, if you want to come around, like, we do a run through every Friday afternoon, for the show. If you guys want to come to the Friday afternoon show and look at, see what we're doing, because we had been involved, at least in some of the scripts that were going to be shot the next couple of months. Not that we had contributed to them, but we had read them and thought about them. So he said, so you might be interested in seeing what they look like, when they actually finally get on the air. So, come around. So we did religiously. We came around every Friday afternoon and always remembered to say hello, not whine, not complain, not tell them how poor we were. Just, tell them how great the show looked that week and this, that, and the other thing, so that we were always in their eyes. They always felt like they had to say hello to us, and we tried to make it. I don't know where we got the maturity to figure out how to do that, because we were basically pretty immature. But that turned out to be a smart thing. That helped us a lot.
How'd you end up getting back on The Odd Couple?
Well, like I say, after a few months of this, Gary came to us one day while we were just standing in the bleachers watching them do the run through. Well, one other thing had happened. We had met a man named Frank Buxton, who had a long career in TV, and we got along very well with him. He was a big trivia buff, and we were big trivia buffs. In fact, he had us on his radio show a couple of times, and he had become the new head writer of The Odd Couple when they changed everything, and he liked us. And Gary said, "Look," as he put it, I think he said, "I hate to see anyone come away with nothing." He said, Frank says he knows you guys. If you have a story idea, because in those days there was still freelance episodes. They didn't give all the episodes to staff. They said, if you guys have an idea that you'd like to pitch an episode to Frank, he says he'd be happy to talk to you. So we went home, and the two of us came up with an idea. And we came in and pitched it to Frank, and he liked it immediately. And he pitched it to Gary, and Gary gave the go-ahead. And they had a thing then where if you had never had a credit, they could pay you for a first episode, like, I don't know, like $8 or something. The Guild, I mean, it was Guild. It was legitimate. It wasn't, a fraud. There was some absurdly low price, like $1,400 or something. Which even then wasn't good money for a primetime show. So they gave us the gig, and we wrote it. And I can still remember, it was like the biggest thing in my life. It was coming up towards the holidays, Thanksgiving-ish, Christmas-ish, and we had been out there one way or another. We'd been out there since April. And I said, I think we're going to go back to New York for a while. We went to Grauman's Chinese Theater to see a Billy Wilder marathon, like 38 consecutive hours of Billy Wilder movies. And those cell phones in those days. We were trying to plan our trip back to New York, but we needed like draft notes to see how they liked our script, or if they liked our script. But, if they liked it, you have to do a second draft. We went out to the lobby between Billy Wilder movies and called the Odd Couple office on the phone. See if they would want to set up a meeting. And Gary got on the phone. Said, just a minute, Gary wants to talk to you. And Gary got on the phone and said, and I could still remember this, he said, I think maybe we were hasty with you guys. He said, why don't you come in? We're looking to put a couple of writers on for the rest of the season. They still had like 9 more episodes to shoot that season. He said, I think you guys could work out.
You must have just plotzed, as my grandfather would say.
Oh, man. It was just, and I remember thinking, if I get fired the second time, it's got to be for a different reason. I can't stand there and be petrified this time like I was the first time. I have to try. You know, I got to swing the bat. I just can't stand there and look at 3 strikes like I did the first time. I have to swing, you know. And we came back on, and everybody was very nice, you know. Well, you know. And Gary and I ultimately became very good friends. We have good friends to this day. And Gary, of course, doesn't like to think that he once fired me, so he would reminisce about something on The Odd Couple, and he'd go, "Weren't you on the show then?" And I go, "No, I wasn't on the show then." And then he'd remember. He'd go, "Oh yes, that's when you were resting." So yeah, I almost rested into starvation, you know. But everybody was very nice, very sweet to us, and I mean, the mood of the show hadn't changed. It was still an open hostility show, but we were, you know, we were welcomed back, and we were better. We had time. The experience of having been there 6 weeks was invaluable. We saw how they did it, at least. And then we had a few months to reflect on it, and we talked about it a lot, Mark and I.
So what was your mistake? When you say this time you're going to swing and you'd learn some stuff?
Joe, we're going to think about the scripts and the episodes and be prepared and have ideas and speak up and say, not freeze. I mean, we froze the first time. We just froze at the wheel. And we're just saying you can't do that. You have to make yourself invaluable. You have to show them that they need you there, that the show would be worse if you hadn't come in that day. I mean, you have to earn your keep.
Do you remember what that first script was?
Very well. It was about Felix's income taxes being investigated. He gets a letter from the IRS, which was a premise we stole from the Honeymooners. We loved the Honeymooners. And the twist we gave was in the Honeymooners, Ralph Cramden gets a letter from the IRS, and he obsesses about it, and he obsesses, and he obsesses, and he obsesses, and then, of course, at the end, it turns out to be nothing. It was a little clerical thing he had to do. We got the idea. Our big idea was that Felix, in obsessing and becoming frantic and insane about it, and totally neurotic, which is what was fun to write for Tony, would, when he went down there in his anxiety and his craziness, he would accidentally rat out Oscar. He would basically do, I'm the most diligent, I have this roommate, he never pays taxes, he never keeps records, he's a fraud, he's a this, he's a that, and I'm the one who that's life, that's the kind of work you people are doing. You picked me to, you know. And they go, oh, no, we were here for nothing. There was no problem, really. But we are interested now in this roommate of yours. So they loved that. That was kind of the moment that Jack actually said to us. He said, the minute I read that, I said, okay. That's what we saw the first time when we read what you guys wrote. That was smart. That was a smart idea.
Well, since you're mentioning Jack, talk a little bit about what you've learned about writing from working with Gary Marshall and from working with Jack Klugman. I understand he gave you some good advice about character and structure.
Jack was great. He was great at the top of his voice. I always feel guilty. I always say the reason, Jack has had throat trouble for decades, and I always say he somewhat facetiously, he ruined his throat yelling at me because I was if I'd have been a better writer, Jack's throat would have been okay. He told you everything at the top of his voice, but he was really smart. He was really smart. And we didn't know about writing character, and he would just get angry, and he would scream the 4 key words to us. He would yell, he'd get right up in our face, and he'd go, "What do I want?" And I go, the character has to have something he wants in every scene, not just in every story, but in every scene. What is his intention? And you realize that what you're writing as an amateur writer, as a kid who doesn't know what he's doing, you're giving him the line you need him to say to get to the next line or to get to the next scene. Why does he want to say that line? Why does why does Oscar want to say that? He's not trying to write a story that we know where it's going. So that was like, it's a simple thing, but not if you don't know it. and that was invaluable. That was, and Tony, you just sort of watched him go through the subtext and use it. He never had to say his subtext. He never had to. You just sort of, and the audience could see it. The audience could see him like just go through everything the character needed to go through to get to the next step. So he'd always say, you don't have to write that. I'll act that. Don't, I can act that. You're writing what I'm going to act, and that was great. And Gary, you asked about, what did Gary teach us? About everything. I am a product of Gary Marshall. I've said, I've told him to his face. I watched him reshape stories, do kind of what he called the what if kind of writing, where the story's not working and he just like sits quietly for a few minutes and says, what if this happened? And you just saw him, wow, we were all trying to just fix this thing in this kind of little way where you just go, well, maybe if it's a better joke or if to find the words. And he, at the same time, was thinking of maybe there's just a completely more interesting and fresher and more entertaining way to come at it from a whole other. And I mean, just life lessons and how to navigate in the business. He's the best.
Is there a difference between a writer who's been trained under Gary Marshall and any other writer? Is there a Gary Marshall type of writer?
Well, not to be arrogant about it, but there are a number of writers who trained under Gary Marshall who did not flourish. Mm-hmm. They had the opportunity. He was there. They could have drawn from the well. For whatever reason, they didn't do what I did. They didn't tune to his frequency. and just eat it all up. But no, there are all kinds of breaks. You can get a break by getting your first job, maybe a little before you deserve it. But that break can be working for people who are just going to teach you crap. Or your first job can incredibly be for Gary, who's going to actually show you how to do it.
What did he teach you about running a writer's room and about casting a writer's room?
Well, yeah, Gary used to say that when I became a head writer, he used to say that no writer's first job should be working for me, because I used to do all their work for them when I was a head writer. Gary, as far as the writer's room, it's difficult. His big thing, what he got excited about regarding me was that I could, in the parlance, break a story. And I don't know why I could, except through years of loving sitcoms on TV. That somebody could come in with an area, and then the story didn't quite work, and I go, okay, that's a pretty interesting area. There's some funny stuff there. What if you took the story this way? And then by the time we finished a meeting, there were 6 or 8 scenes, and they were in order, and they built to something, and there was a continuity. And Gary thought that was like gold, because the writers he hired, he didn't expect them to be able to do that. I mean, he knew like Jerry Belson could do it, Harvey could do it, the top guys who were getting, thousands of dollars an episode could do it. But when he saw that I could sort of do it, he in the same way that I tuned to his frequency, he really started to take an interest in me.
And what about Mark? You're talking about yourself as the breaking the story guy. What was Mark bringing to it?
Mark was great when we wrote together. Mark was and he is a wonderful writer, and we wrote really, really well together. Mark was at a disadvantage in the sense that Mark didn't really love that sort of thing of being completely spontaneous and going from 0 to 60 in a room with other people, and most people don't enjoy that. So Mark got kind of a bad rap. people outside our partnership began to see it as an unequal partnership in my favor, which was not actually true. When we wrote, I felt not the slight. I didn't feel like I was carrying any more than 50% of the load when we were writing.
What was your writing process?
Our writing process was very verbal. It was very improvisational. It was very out in the air. It was very talky. Very, just being the characters and speaking them. And the one or the other of us would write it down in longhand. We'd stop every few minutes and catch up, read up to where we were. And that's how we wrote. And it's actually how I still write, how I write now, features over the last 30 years with Babalu.
How was that different from the way the scripts were then crafted or rewritten at the table with the other writers on the show?
Well, there were many steps. The script, whether it was an in-house script, as we called something we wrote, or a freelance script, was distributed among all the writers. We would take a meeting on it. We would the original writer, if it was a freelance writer, was given more than one step, but at some point they were. The interesting thing about Gary's shows is we never took credit away from the freelance writer. No matter how much work we did afterwards, it was always there written by on the screen, and that was 100% always. And I thought that was very classy of us, if I say so myself. You don't see that. Didn't see that too much. But it would be talked about in the room. The head writer would usually assign the next rewrite of the script to one of the staff, us or somebody else would go to work on it. Then we'd kind of work on it all together. We'd prepare it for the table, as we called it. The whole staff would find an afternoon to sit together and pre-table it, do a table before the table, to bring it to the table a week in advance for Jack and Tony. We would, somewhere along the line, we would have gotten Gary's notes also. He would have had a chance to read it, and we would get some notes, sometimes detailed, sometimes cryptic, depending on, Gary had a few shows going at the same time. We would read it. We would get Jack and Tony's notes. That would make a major rewrite that week between the Monday table where the script was previewed and the Monday table where that was actually the script we were doing that week. And then all week while we were shooting that script, we'd rewrite it. We would see a run-through on Wednesday, rewrite the show Wednesday night. We'd see a run-through on Thursday, rewrite the show Thursday night, and shoot the show on Friday.
Did you always write with Mark, or did you sometimes team up with others on the staff?
I always wrote with Mark, but as I say, there were these gang sessions also. We gang wrote sometimes also, but I never paired off in those days with any other writer.
Now, I've read other accounts from Jack Klugman and Tony Randall where they seem to take great pride in tearing apart the scripts. They seem to refer to it as repairing the scripts.
Yes.
How did you feel about that, knowing your scripts would go through the Randall-Klugman buzzsaw?
Towards the end, we came back on the show late in the third season. We did the third season, the fourth season, the fifth season. Odd Couple went off after the fifth season. And I have to confess that by the fifth season, I was getting a little weary. Not physically weary, but just a little discouraged with the idea that every script that went to the table was simply there to be pulled apart. And I still hadn't quite developed the discipline yet, which I soon did develop, to say, that's not my problem. We have to make this as good as we think it can be. I have to admit, I started just a little bit to slip into a kind of, well, what's the difference? They're not going to like it anyway. We'll do the real writing in that interim week, which is not a good attitude. But in my defense, it was hard to... The good thing about Jack and Tony, and there were many good things, was they loved the show, they loved each other, they were great, and if they thought it was a weak show, they were better. If they thought they were going in front of the audience with a weaker episode, they were dynamic. And they paid it. Even though they took credit for everything, they still afterwards said it was a great show. They would say things to you like, "We told you we'd pull it out of the fire for you," which at least gave you the sense. I know that sounds sort of patronizing. Well, it is sort of patronizing. But what was great about it is they were at least saying the show was great, we succeeded, and we're happy. And because later you worked on shows where you were in conflict with the cast, and afterwards they would say something more like, "We told you it wouldn't work." And that was much worse. That was much worse. But Gary used to say to us, he used to say to me and Mark, "Look, I know what this is. I know what's going on. Let me just tell you, if you can work for here at the Odd Couple, you'll always be able to work. You'll have a job the rest of your lives because it'll always seem easier wherever you go." So he knew, we did appreciate how brilliant they were.
Were there two Gary Marshalls you were working for? Was there the Gary Marshall, the writer, and the Gary Marshall, the producer? Or were they totally intermingled? Were you able to take two different lessons from your experience with him?
I was kind of in awe of Gary, and the producer side of him I saw kind of early on. I kind of threw in the towel on, even though I did become a TV producer. In my mind, I said, maybe I could become as good a writer as Gary. I said, I don't think I can become as good a producer. I was at least right about the second part. I said he has this kind of wisdom and charm that are really hard to even understand, let alone emulate. The writing was really my goal. I said, I want to do what he does at the table. That's my goal. That's my ambition. That's the light for me out there. I want to be able to do that. And no ego or false modesty. That I think I at least sort of replicated at some point and took it in a different direction, because the last 30 years I've been a writer. I've been writing features rather than working in TV. But that all grew out of my writing lessons rather than my producing lessons.
What were some of the producing lessons he taught you? I mean, what were the skills he had that you didn't seem to think you could achieve?
Well, it was network, it was studio, it was kind of hearing the pulse of what was going on in the business at a time and going, oh, this is the right time to do this kind of a show, or make this kind of a combination of people, and there was just like a million things that I would just sort of like go, that I just want to write. I just want to fix the story. I don't mean to sound like I was completely lame at it. I did sort of get it on some level, and Mark learned a lot about producing from Gary, and he carried, when we had our own shows later on, he carried a lot of that load. He cast our shows and hired people to do the music, and all of that kind of thing, but I really all I really ever wanted to do was write.
How did your partnership evolve, though, during The Odd Couple? I mean, you're in this new environment. You have different goals, I guess. You were more the writer. He was more the producer.
No, we had the same goals.
Same goals?
We both wanted to be Gary, on one level or another. We wanted to be head writers and producer writers and write pilots and have our own show. And we wanted to be a big team. We wanted to be Marshall and Belson, who aren't a team anymore at that point, although we did get to work with Jerry Belson, which was great, because he was what we call field goal kicking on the Odd Couple. He would come in like once a week to make the show better, and he was awesome. He was an awesome writer, very intimidating. He didn't mean to be. He wasn't cruel or anything, but you just. I said actually at Jerry's memorial service, he died a couple of years ago. I said my first thought when I met Jerry Belson was, if this is how funny you have to be to do this for a living, I'm in big trouble. And I said that, and everybody got it at the moment. I said, I discovered, though, that there was a big gap between as funny as Jerry and employable, and I could live in that. He was an awesome writer, so we wanted to be Marshall and Belson. We wanted to have our own shows someday, and be the big shots, be the bosses and everything. And Mark, I think, really just liked the whole idea of being a boss. I just wanted to be in charge of the writing, but we got along. We got along great.
Did you have some favorite episodes that you wrote?
No, a couple. We liked the first one. We loved the Fear of Flying episode. That was kind of funny. We wrote that. That was a pretty good episode. The ticket scalping episode was kind of funny. I enjoyed that.
So what is it about those episodes that stand out for you from the other ones that you've done that make you smile and remember them after all these years?
I just really they were real. The ticket scalping episode came because an actual close friend of mine got arrested for ticket scalping, and we gave it to Felix, and it was just fresh. It was just fresh. Felix getting arrested was fun, and I remember Jack again paid us a compliment. He said they were down in a police station for hours, and Jack said, because they took mug shots, and Oscar said something like, we would have been out there hours early if you hadn't rearranged all the lights for the thing. And Jack said, that's a great Odd Couple joke. That's a real Odd Couple joke. That's like from Neil Simon. That's from the day, And I'm like, oh, God, thank you, And so I always remembered, like, when if you saw Jack and Tony light up, so that was great. And the Fear of Flying, I don't know, they just had so much fun with it. They'd done the show a long time, and any time I felt like they were really like, they'd go, hey, like you just go, oh boy, I really, it was like a big score to kind of like when they made you feel like you would kind of thrill them a little bit with something. So those were kind of the.
Well, was it hard after as many seasons as the show had been on the air, coming up with those kind of episodes that would reinvigorate the cast in that way?
Yes, it was. It was kind of hard. And look, my greatest creative regret in my entire career is that the best TV show I ever worked on was the one I worked on when I was the worst writer I've ever been. That is my single biggest writing regret. The Odd Couple was the best show I ever worked on with the best weapons that were ever given to me, and I was still learning. And I said, "Oh my God, another memorial story. This is a bad theme." At Tony's memorial a few years ago, I said, in an alternative reality, I would have come back and worked on The Odd Couple as a more mature man and a better writer, which I know I became a more mature man, and God, I hope I became a better writer, and what I think I could have contributed to them, but it was all happening kind of fast, and I was barely learning my business, and it was a tough show. They were kind of, they were shooting bullets. They were shooting bullets at your feet. But it was hard, but it was hard, like I say, because I wasn't nearly as good a writer as I flatter myself that I became later.
I'm sorry? Oh, we have to change the tape, so we're going to stop for just a moment.